Okay, I'm going to stop presenting. And I'm also going to have this laptop camera down here on my surface. And I'm going to have my Chromebook on my face. So if for some reason you want to reference my face, you can pin it. But otherwise, my main camera is going to be focused on my surface here. So a couple of things. I have my pinch pot that I made last week. I have completely finished the form, meaning I'm really happy with how thin it is. It should be about the thickness of my finger, okay? It's nice and even. I have gone through with some water and polished up the rim a little bit. So I went through and kind of compressed with my finger. I also let it sit out a little bit last period and firm up. So it's not soaking wet anymore and it's not gonna just like fall apart in my hands super easily. Okay. So I decided that I would like to add some feet to this. So here's an example of the kind of look I'm going for. Remember, I'm going to turn this into a plant pot, so I'm going to put some holes in it eventually for drainage. But I'm going to make 4 little feet. Some other options. Here's another type of foot. We call this a foot ring. I'll show you how to make one of those. So if you'd rather have that kind of look, you can add a decorative rim. So this person rolled out a piece and added kind of these little fingerprints on this, and they also added feet too. Or even adding something to the outside of the form. So I love how this person added flowers to their piece. Okay. And notice that they go all the way around, right? Because it's 3-dimensional. It just doesn't have just one side, right? And they also added a nice foot here. So to add an attachment, I'm going to show you how to properly attach things, basically. So the first thing you're going to want to do is make your attachment. So I made these little feet for my pinch pot. Okay. So, and I'm going to be putting them on the bottom. And I thought about size. I didn't want to make them too huge. So I'm going to rest this. I turned it over because it's nice and firm now. I'm going to take my cup of slip. So you should take your slip cup, and you might want to take your fork and kind of mix it up again a little bit. Mine's still a little bit on the chunky side, but that's okay. And I'm also going to take my toothbrush for applying the slip. And now what I'm going to do, and you can just watch and do this on your own in a minute, I am going to do what's called scoring, which is creating a rough surface area to make the attachment with. To do the scoring, I'm thinking my skewer that I gave you all would be the best tool. This is the wooden skewer. So I'm just going to rough up the area that I want to make my attachment with. So I'm making kind of like back and forth lines, almost like a tic-tac-toe board. So this is called scoring. So scoring is creating kind of a rough surface, and what it does is it makes more surface area, and that way your joints will have something to kind of adhere to, right? So I've roughed up the area. To do this, you could use, again, your skewer, you could use your fork, you could use those toothpicks I gave you, but I think the skewer did a pretty good job. And then, whatever I am attaching, so these little clay balls, I also need to go in and rough them up. So I'm essentially roughing up each piece that is getting attached. If you do not do this and you attach things, they usually will fall off at some point. Maybe in the kiln, maybe when you take it home and you start using it, they're not going to be well attached. Okay, so I've got this, and then I've got my little pieces that have the texture on them. Okay. And now what I'm going to do is take my toothbrush, or you can use your finger, and I'm going to take some of my slip. I'm going to get in there and try to get some of that thick stuff. And I am applying it to the textured spots that I just made. And I'm going to also do that on these little feet. Again, you shouldn't be adding any attachments until you're 100% done with like your form and your smoothing and everything. And I recommend doing the attachments before doing any other surface stuff because it's better to draw on the clay when it's a little drier if you're planning on drawing. So then I've got my feet on here. But I want to make sure that it sits level. So I'm just going to put it on the ground here and kind of give it a little wiggle because I think it's a little bit too tall. So I'm going to kind of wiggle it a little bit so that it sits nicely. And it's still honestly feeling a little bit too tall for me, so I'm going to wiggle it again and kind of push it down until I like where it's sitting. Okay, now these are looking a little bit rough, right? I've attached them, but they're still a little bit messy. So I'm going to take my finger, or if you had a paintbrush, you could use a paintbrush, and I'm going to try to smooth some of this slip away. Because whatever you see is what you get. When I fire this, if this looks messy, it's still going to be messy after it gets fired, except it's going to be permanent and I can't fix it. Another thing I can do is take I gave everybody one of these smoothing tools. Some of them have little teeth on them. Some of them are a little different than mine, but you all have a smoothing tool. So now I can go in and I can use this tool to kind of smooth down the edges of these little feet and make sure they look really clean. So I'm just really pushing them down and making sure they're well joined. Okay. The other way that I can make, so I'm going to set this aside. The other way that I could make a foot is take a little bit of my clay. For this small amount of work, you really don't need to wedge it because it's just such a small piece of clay that working with it itself is probably going to remove any problems that you might have with it. So if your clay starts to dry as you're working with it too, remember that you can add a little bit of your slip or a little water to it. Okay, so right now I call this a long snake of clay. So what if I want to make a foot that isn't balls? What if I want to make a little foot that's made out of a rope of clay? So I'm going to roll this on my plastic tablecloth. And then I'm going to flatten it. And, here's another pinch pot that I made earlier. So I could do the same thing here. I would just put this little flat, I would go like this. I would slip and score it on, right? And then I would smooth it down. But again, I need to score this and score the piece and any other joints, okay? So that's how you would make a foot ring, okay? This piece could also get used on the rim. Let's say I wanted to make the rim, I want to make this a juice cup, I want it to be a little bit taller. I could slip and score it on the rim, right, to make it taller, and then I can smooth it down. One last thing I wanted to show you for attachments. Let's say I wanted to make some decorative leaves that I wanted to cut out. I could kind of take a little piece of clay and flatten it out with my hand, and then you each have a little rolling pin. I got these at the recycling center, so if you're like, where did you get these things? Because some of them like have labels on them, some of them have some like old glue on them, so I don't know. I got them at the recycling center. I don't know where they came from other than the recycling center, but some of you have a cardboard tube. Some of you have a little like plastic tube. That was intended as a rolling pin. If you have like your own rolling pin that you want to use, it's fine, but I wouldn't use it with food afterward. So if I wanted to roll this a little bit flat, I can take this little roller and roll a nice flat piece. Okay. It doesn't matter how thin it is because it's just going to be propped up against my piece. And then let's say, again, I wanted to create like a leaf motif or anything like that. Oh, this looks pretty good, actually. I wasn't sure about these little tubes, but so I've got a nice kind of flat pancake of clay. And then I could take my toothpick or my any other tool. In the studio, we have really nice knives and cutting tools, but again, I didn't have enough to send home to all my students, and they're quite expensive, so I tried to make do, but these things are working pretty well, actually, I gotta say. So here's my leaf, right? I just cut it out with my toothpick, and then if I wanted to, I could slip and score that right on to my pinch pot, and then I could add some more detail into it, okay? So again, I could just rough up the surface with my bamboo skewer. So the requirement for these pinch pots is going to be that you do some sort of attachment on your piece, and then I will also be asking you to do either texturizing, cutting, drawing into the piece as well. So for texture and drawing, you know, this person drew flowers into the piece. Here's some nice texture. I would love it if you guys found some cool textures from home that you wanted to press in, but you could also make some really cool textures or drawings just with this bamboo skewer too. In general, texture and drawing is better when the piece is a little bit drier, but it really, you know, if you want to do your texture first, you can. So there's my leaf. And again, whatever you add, just make sure you go around and clean it up. If you have roughness, like you can see this isn't super clean right now, I can go around with my finger and a little bit of water and do that finishing work. This is where being in the classroom would be helpful because it's really hard to see over the camera like exactly, you know, what this looks like and what your work looks like. All right, so that's essentially what we're doing today. First finish up your form. After you've finished your form, then start adding your attachment, okay? So we're gonna continue to work. We'll probably work until about 11:55, and then we will touch base to see where everybody's at.